so speaking with Peter Murrett of Vive Incorporated to talk about some of the human rights examples or the human rights cases for asylum and get some legal understanding of asylum cases. So first of all, why don't we just talk about in the United States, what are the conditions for applying for asylum?
Okay, well, it's not just the United States, it's under international treaty and agreement. There's a definition of a refugee, and a refugee is a person who has been persecuted or has a reasonable fear of being persecuted by his native country as a result of being a member of a protected group, political opinion, social group, race, religion, nationality. So you have to have past persecution or fear of future persecution. There's what's called nexus, which is the relationship to the country. It's got to be persecution by your country or persecution that your country permits others to inflict upon you. So that's the legal standard, and that's set up by treaty. And then it's also incorporated into the United States law, so that when you come here and start a refugee claim, there's a whole process of procedures and rules and so on and so forth, but it all is within the umbrella of the treaty protection that I've described.
Mm-hmm. So for those applying for asylum, typically do you have to apply for asylum before you come to the United States and obtain it?
There is that process, and that's called, if you apply from overseas, you're asking for refugee protection. If you come to the United States and apply from within the United States, you're asking for asylum. So there are those two prongs of applying before you get here and then applying once you're already here. The place, the group that Vive works with is pretty much the group that gets here and then decides to apply for asylum after they've come to the United States.
And typically, are those who apply for asylum or refugee status, are there any other, obviously the ultimate goal is to get citizenship here. Are there other avenues that can be obtained, or that can be taken?
Well, in terms of refugee status, you have to file within 1 year after your last entry to the United States. And if you don't file within that time limit, you're no longer eligible to be a refugee or to ask for refugee protection or asylum unless you show special circumstances. But you can still ask for protection of something that's called withholding of removal, which means that if it's granted, the United States won't send you back to your native country. The United States will permit you to stay here, but you're not on a road to any status. And you can also apply for protection under the Convention Against Torture, which is the same thing. It kind of puts you in limbo. You don't have status, but you can stay here and don't have to go back to your native country. And then there are other routes to citizenship, certainly. I mean, there's through student visas, through work, through family sponsorships and so forth, that we don't really get involved in. We deal with refugees.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So in terms of coming here, when you're here, what are some of the biggest obstacles in terms of basic human rights that you would say refugees face in terms of either legal representation, or what are some of the biggest obstacles in general?
Once they're here,
right.
once they're here, it's considered that the asylum process is a civil process, not a criminal process, and therefore you don't have the right to an attorney provided by the government. Excuse me. You do have a right to be represented by an attorney, but you have to pay for the attorney or find the attorney yourself. It won't be provided for or paid for by the government. That's a decision that's pretty common in the split between civil and criminal cases, but in immigration cases you can wind up in jail. And if you're held in detention, it's hard to see the difference between being in jail for one reason or another reason. You're still in jail. And I think that there's an argument that you ought to have legal representation, even though immigration is considered a civil process, for people in jail. Once you're out of jail, I think it would be fair to help people get an attorney. But as you know, we don't get attorneys for people like in divorce cases, which are serious cases also. So it's a closer question, but there's no question but that refugees who are represented by attorneys have a far greater success rate and a far greater ability to successfully present the evidence of their case than those that don't have the assistance of counsel. So the assistance of counsel is very important for the refugees, and there's an argument that it would be more fair to give them more legal assistance in the process.
Mm-hmm. And when refugees come here, I want to discuss about the legal proceedings a little bit, but in terms of social services, do refugees obtain the same social services?
Other than some sorts of emergency services for children, there's very little emergency medical services for children. There's very few services available for refugees when they come here. They're not, in general, they're not entitled to any social services, any benefits like food or housing, any medical assistance, anything like that. And then on top of that, they're not allowed to work until 6 months after they file their refugee application. And that can frequently take 4 to 6 months to prepare the application and 6 months to file it. So that means typically, and this is an average, but typically they can't work in the United States for at least a year after getting here. So during that first year, we don't provide them anything, but we also refuse to allow them to work and provide for themselves. And so they're basically the subjects of charity, churches, places like Vive. And I think that's an unfairness. I think that's a basic unfairness. If we won't provide them with some basic human services, then we ought to let the refugees work for themselves to take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of while they're waiting for their status to be declared, what's typically the what's the process for that?
Well, there's two prongs to an asylum application in the United States. One is called affirmative asylum, one is called defensive asylum. And affirmative asylum is where you apply yourself for the protection. Defensive asylum is where you're in immigration court, and as part of the immigration court proceedings, you apply for asylum. So if a refugee applies for affirmative asylum, and it can take, as I said, 4 to 6 months easily to find an attorney, get past language problems, get documents and supporting corroboration from your home country, and file the application. And then it can take another 2 to 4 months to have a hearing, and another 2 to 4 months to have a decision. So you're looking at about a year. Is really a fairly fast-track process for that. So it's about a year before they could be granted asylum and get into resettlement and the type of thing that Journey's End does. But more likely, more typically, and especially if they get denied in their affirmative case, the case goes into immigration court as a defensive case. Or if you've already been caught and you haven't filed an affirmative case, you begin as a defensive case in immigration court, and that can drag on. I mean, in Buffalo, that can be a matter of 2 to 3 years, and other courts are not as drawn out, but it's a lengthy process. And then if you lose an immigration court and you go to the Board of Immigration Appeals, and then if you appeal beyond that to the Second Circuit, federal court, it gets sent back here and you start all over again. Cases have been known to last 7, 8, 10 years. Now, 10 years is extraordinarily long. 1 year is fairly atypically brief. But for the average case, especially if it gets into immigration court, to last 2 to 3 years is certainly not unusual.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of cost for, is there a cost for?
Well, most of the refugees that come here don't have much money. Vive provides my services pro bono for free, so I don't really keep track of an hourly rate, all right? But I would guess that just to prepare an application and go to a hearing, a reasonable fee would be a minimum of $5,000. And then if you're talking about going to immigration court and hearings there, that's another $5,000. So I would think a minimum of $10,000 for the whole process upwards, and then go on up for the cost of appeals that I was talking about, and go up from there for the further cost of additional proceedings if that's necessary. It potentially is a very expensive process, but most of the legal services are provided pro bono or certainly at a steep discount.
And another thing that I wanted to talk about, because I know it deals with this, is the issue of detention. I know that in some cases it's not, as you were saying, it's not necessarily criminal detention. So I wanted to discuss like what the purpose of detention is and who's...
Well, when people who are out of status, whether they're overstays or whether they're here on a student visa but they're not going to school, it's a matter of not having having lost the permission. When you come into the country, you're granted permission to be a visitor for 60 days, to go to this school, to do whatever. If you've lost that permission, you're out of status, and people who are out of status are put into removal proceedings. Until pretty recently, it was fairly standard procedure to put single women and men into detention. In this area, we have the Buffalo Federal Detention Facility in Batavia, and women would be sent to county jails on a contract basis. Generally, women with children would be released, but the purpose of the detention is essentially similar to criminal bail and detention, to assure that they'll appear in court and to assure that they'll comply with the orders of the court. Different areas of the country have different policies. There are some areas that have detention facilities where they keep the entire family. Little kids are in jail. But the policies have become more humane, I believe, more lenient recently, both because I think of the effects of some changes in policies by the Obama administration and some restrictions put on by budget cuts. So we now see many women who would have previously been held in jail under bonds of anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 being released on their own recognizance, and we even see some men getting out on their own recognizance and with reduced bonds. So the role of detention is by no means gone away, but it's less of an impact than it was even 5 years ago.
And like you were saying, do you see that in terms of recent immigration changes in recent immigration policy, do you see that some of these issues that you're talking about are a bit more favorable towards refugees, helping expedite the process?
No, the detention aspects go across the so-called illegal immigration, or out-of-status immigrant board, which includes, the migrant workers in the Southwest and so on and so forth. But up here, we're dealing primarily with refugees, and even the proposed changes in the immigration law, other than to the extent they affect detention, I don't think really change the refugee process. They do change other rights for other people who are in the United States out of status, and as I say, a lot of it goes to the migrant workers and so forth in the Southwest and West. I haven't read of anything in the current process, in the current discussions that really get me excited about help for refugees.
Okay. And I think that should be okay. Do you think are there any other aspects of the refugee case? I guess are there any other aspects that you think, in terms of legal issues or human rights problems, that you think are?
No, well, I think I've covered it. I think the refugees get the short end of the stick, and just about every time you turn around. As I say, we don't provide for them or let them provide for themselves. We don't give them legal assistance, and we have a court system that's basically broken. And it's not a matter of any problem with any individual. It's understaffed. It takes too long, and it's fairly inconsistently applied. I mean, some jurisdictions have a very high grant rate, and others have a very low grant rate, and so there's a potluck aspect to it about what court you're in and what judge you got. And so I think those three things. I mean, I think we ought to help them until they can help themselves. I think we ought to give them some legal assistance, and I think we ought to give them a court system that's efficient and fairly even-handed. Not just an adjudication system, because there are the affirmative claims. So an adjudication system which includes the affirmative claims and the courts.
Okay. And one other thing, I think you discussed it before, but I just wanted to get back onto it. One of the issues that we talk about is the issue of relativism and universalism in terms of setting policies. So universalism being probably more UN-based policies, that there's general policies. Do UN policies factor into legal proceedings at all, legal basis, and like, do you think that these rights are considered as part of a general human rights issue, or are they specific to just the United States?
Well, yes and no. The UN certainly puts out human rights statements and is considered authoritative on the area of human rights, but it doesn't really get involved, at least in the U.S. court system, in the on-the-ground scramble and battle to win a specific case, generally speaking. So they have these pronunciamentos, and then the individual judges and adjudicators can pretty much give them the weight they want to give them. And some, I think, give it fairly significant weight, and others just say, oh, those guys are, there they go again.
Right. So in terms of enforcement, there's a problem, but ultimately it's up to the sovereignty to
up to the sovereignty, and the sovereignty is pretty much delegated it to the individual judge, which gets into the consistency issue that I addressed earlier.
Right. So and as well, so some of these issues in terms of detention and legal representation, these will vary based on the region that in the United States.
Yeah. What was the first thing you said?
In terms of legal representation, or just some of these general issues, detention and...
Oh, detention, yeah.
Right.
Detention policies definitely vary from one place to another. Legal representation doesn't vary as much because it's fairly non-existent. I mean, it relies, there are organizations around the country that provide pro bono services to lawyers, and they're all overworked and underpaid. And there are immigration attorneys in private practice that, in my opinion, go far beyond the call of duty in providing pro bono services. I mean, these are people who have office staff and overhead and families and mortgages, and yet they provide pro bono services. So I think they're to be applauded, but it's not uniform. I mean, there's no program. It's just if you go here and there happens to be an active bunch of lawyers, you might get more help than here where there's not. And depending on where there might be NGOs that have lawyers that provide pro bono services. So that's not uniform at all, and the courts aren't uniform at all. There's really no uniformity in the system.
Right. Okay. And do you think, is that for all immigration cases, or specifically with refugee and asylum in terms of the uniformity?
Well, refugee and asylum work is what I'm familiar with, but I think there's problems with uniformity pretty much throughout the system.
Okay. All right. Well, I think that should do it and wrap it up. Thanks for your help. Thanks a lot.